Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of Illustration Masterclass. Today we're going to be looking at Joe Mad. I've done a design theater video on him before, but I wanted to revisit his stuff just because as I'm getting better, I'm learning and discovering new things, and so I want to make note of some of the things it is that I'm learning and share them here with you guys because I'm a huge fan of Joe Mad, and I'm a huge fan of this line art style, this deceptively simple line art style. An amateur looks at something like this and they say, "Oh, this is easy." This is not easy because all of these decisions have to be made correctly, otherwise it looks off. All of these shapes here have to be designed specifically uh, in a very clean and specific way, otherwise they won't fit. Whereas like with something that's highly detailed and highly rendered, you can kind of uh, you can kind of blur the lines between the bits of them. And you can kind of hide the things it is that you don't know. But when it comes to this like more simple stuff, uh, it's really clear if you know how to draw this or you don't know how to draw it, right? So there's just no way of hiding whenever you're doing a style like this. And understanding design is really necessary. So as usual in these videos, I pull out completely and we take a look at it and we see this nice silhouette. And we've got this nice diagonal kind of gesture looking down. I really dig the face here, but the thing that I'm mostly looking at with this image is the line weight, right? Like if we zoom in here and we start looking at the lines, we can see that he'll often start at the top of one of these lines right here. It'll be very thin, and then as it goes down and it churns away from the light source, so you could basically say this is the light source touching this part of the back right here, right? So this line right here that is going parallel to this light shape is very thin. And then as it churns into the shadow, it becomes wider, aka darker, until it starts to form its own shadow shape, its own shape here. And then this connects with this much darker line art shape here and connects here, right? And so there's a couple of different things it is that he's using. He's starting off shapes even here, right? Like it's almost like there's less weight, there's less pressure being pushed down here, and so he keeps the line that's the spine, he keeps it very thin. But the more weight it is that it has, the darker it is that it gets, and the thicker the line gets, right? So his lines take on, they're not just flat lines. They take on a shape in and amongst themselves. And when they overlap with something, such as like right here, they definitely get darker or they get thicker, right? So it's not all the same thickness. Same thing here. Or just in the way that this arm overlaps with the rest of his body. He likes to also put these cast shadows here, completely in dark. And this is one of my favorite things that he does, which is that he has these dark shadow shapes that are here, but these dark shadow shapes are also connected to these casted shadow shapes that are coming off of the bottom of his armor, right? There's also a lot of other design principles going on here, like there's a lot of repeating elements that we see throughout. We see these kind of shapes here, here. They're getting repeated throughout the piece, all throughout here, as well as on his arm. Both sides of his arm are asymmetrical, so the armor on this arm and the armor on this arm is asymmetrical. These shapes are very similar to the shapes that are here on his waist. So they're like repeating patterns. So that goes back to what I was saying in previous episodes about using repeating patterns or repeating shapes and having them at different sizes of big, medium, and small. So let's go ahead and let's move on to the next one. This is a comic book cover. Again, we can look at this just from the compositional angle. In any good composition, like I always say, you should be able to pull back pretty significantly and tell what it is that's going on. And so we can see the silhouette here of the two characters, and we can see very clearly that he puts the darkest values on this character that is in the background, that is basically holding this foreground character like a frame, right? She does not extend beyond the frame of this character here, really. She does a little bit here, she does a little bit here, but she doesn't extend really past him. She's not like standing over here. So this does a couple of different things. It frames her because she is of a lighter value in terms of her clothes. So like if we were to take this and we were to just fill this layer with black and just look at it in terms of black and white, we can get a clearer look of what it is that I mean whenever I say we look at this in terms of value, right? This background back here, these values are they're pretty light. They don't go too dark, or actually they go darker than I thought they would. But definitely the darkest darks are going to take place here on this figure, which makes sense because, again, we want to think about it in terms of staggering the values. So when we have a background, we want the background to either be light or we want it to be dark. And then the thing that's going to be in front of that, which is going to be on the midground or the foreground of the image, is going to have to be the opposite, right? So if the background is very light, then obviously the foreground is going to be very dark. And so we can see that here in this image. The background, it feels very much like a ghosted image. It's almost like he drew this, he may have drew this to the same level of detail as these two characters, but then he probably put a layer over it and dimmed it down, right? This is one of my favorite drawings by him. I think I remember this PlayStation magazine that this was in. If you remember this PlayStation magazine when he did this Metal Gear Solid cover, please leave me a comment in the description box, because I want to know who's watching my videos that's as old as me. Because this was back from like 2000, 2001 or something like that. But yeah, again, you have the same sort of thing, right? We can pull back and we can look at the composition. And we can see those same rules applying of light and dark. We can see different elements such as creating a nice strong silhouette. You have this very strong silhouette that goes like this, goes around like this. And it basically creates a frame that keeps our eye on this side of the page. right? And you could say that we really have this back and forth sort of thing going all the way from the background, which would be this figure here, and we go right, left, and then we go back over here, and then we go back over here, and then we go back over here, right? So there's this nice right, left, right, left, right, right? And even her pose is keeping us in the frame of this image because the arms are coming up like this and they're pointing us up to her face and they're pointing us back up to this, right? And so it's really about organizing information. That's really what it is that you're doing as an illustrator. If you're putting together a good composition, it's about organizing the information in a way that makes it effective for your eye to move through the image. And so using things like staggering different elements in a foreground and a background and moving them back and forth from right to left as you move from the background to the foreground is one way of doing that. All right, so we've got a couple more images and then I'll go ahead and let you guys go. This one is this is pretty intense drawing. Like I really dig this. It's an incredible drawing, man. So what I think, one of the things that I think that makes this drawing really powerful is that he has this very strong amount of detail, but it has that kind of iconic comic book feel to it, partly because it's an exaggerated art style, but also because like he doesn't have anything going on in the background, right? Like there's nothing going on back here in the background. It's just these characters duking it out, and you know he's using a lot of curves and he's using a lot of different things to keep your attention where he wants you to go. So you know you have like these chains are leading us up to this fist and they're wrapping around this fist, and the angle of the fist is pointing us back down, along with the expression on the face is pointing us back down to this character. And you could say that this is like a leading line that's coming here, and it's going through this horn, and you could say it's taken us to this area here, which is like a series of curves that are basically pointing us back up to this central conflict between these two characters. That would be my interpretation of it, right? Because there's detail gets lost a little bit down here. He doesn't put as much detail here or here. But yeah, this is a very complicated drawing. A lot of detail going on here. All right, let's look at these next. Let's look at these next two. Sorry, I got to close these out before my computer lifts off into outer space. All right, so now we've got this piece. And this one's interesting because we're looking at something that clearly has a foreground and a background aspect to it. However, the thing is that since we don't have color in this image, then it can feel a little bit confusing because we have this character here in the foreground, right? But then the background character, since they're both just inked at this moment, it's not clear that they are separate in this environment, that they're separate in this space. Which is interesting to note because he would probably have to drop either the background or the foreground character into either a dark or a light color scheme. or warm or a cool color scheme in order to contrast the two different characters and to create that sense of distance between them. But regardless, we still see the same elements of what we were talking about before, which is the use of strong shadow shapes. We see these forms such as his leg, they disappear into these shadow shapes. And this creates a lot of depth, and it also helps create a lot of perspective in the image itself. And it really gives it this iconic kind of feel. Like, I love the way he designs these hands, for instance. The hands are incredibly complicated and hard to design, right? But his hands, they feel very iconic the way that he's drawn them here, right? And then we see that here in the image of this horse here, right? Yeah, it's the same thing. You get these big shadow shapes, and these big shadow shapes, they help differentiate between where this horse ends and where this guy's foot begins, right? But at the same time, if you look closely enough, this dark black shape, it churns into the same shadow shape that is here in the armor on this guy's foot, which is interesting, right? It's a very subtle thing, because if you think about this, if this was all done in a very low line weight, if it was all done in one low line weight, it would be an incredibly confusing drawing. But even though it's black and white, and it's clear that the differentiation between the foreground and the background hasn't been completely made, we can still get the sense of depth from the way that he's depicted the shadows.